radioactive clothing, government cover-ups, and a whole lot of dead hikers. We're unraveling the twisted theories surrounding the Dyatlov Pass incident on the Parallax Podcast. Who was it, aliens, military, or something even stranger?
Hello.
Hi, Karisa. I'm happy we're finally here.
Oh my gosh. We had to change our wording just so they would stop, banning us.
I know. The amount of times we have tried to start this recording, just tonight, and have had things go wrong makes me think that somebody does not want us to talk about this subject. But we're going to do it anyway, so.
But listen, so this brings up a great subject. Back when I was tattooing a specific person, her name's Kim. Her and I love to talk about UFOs and government cover-ups and stuff.
Yeah.
And we would do lives on Facebook when I was tattooing her because people knew who she was. I would tattoo her and people would ask questions. And we were because we were doing a UFO tattoo. We were doing a tattoo of her first experience with a UFO in her yard. It was like this forearm piece. It was very big. It was very nice. I drew it out from her based on pictures. Anyways, as we're talking about it, we just talking about cover-ups and conspiracies and all these things you wouldn't believe how many times our Facebook Live got shut down.
Because
we're coming back.
They're watching too.
They were watching, they were listening, and they were literally shutting us down. So
yeah, you can't be talking about that.
Yeah, and we're on a military base. We'd be talking about but we're not talking about the U.S. military technically. We're talking about the Russian military.
I'll say this all happens in Russia, but they'd be listening. So speaking of this, happening in Russia, I also want to make another quick disclaimer. I am not Russian. Karisa is not Russian. The amount of things
what
I'm
are you
about
talking
to
about?
Oh my gosh.
I'm kidding.
But the amount of things I'm about to mispronounce, I'm very sorry. I did do some practice rounds before this, but the names and such I'm about to mispronounce, I do not do so with any intent to cause any kind of offense. I just am not Russian. So I'm very sorry, but I'm going to try the best I can. There's a lot of stuff in here.
Just approach the names in a very angry manner. And
be perfect. Yeah. I'll try. So the other thing about the Dyatlov Pass incident, obviously this is a very well-known case that's been covered a lot. We're going to try and see if we can hit some different perspectives that haven't been talked about. The other thing is, since this case has been covered so much, I feel like it hasn't been covered very recently. Just because everybody's like, well, everybody's talked about that. And there actually are some more recent developments and some more recent organizations that have put together a conglomeration essentially of all the different files and such that have to do with this case. So I'm hoping that we can bring to the table some details that haven't been talked about. And because there's honestly just so much information and there's a lot out there covering this case, I'm going to delve a lot deeper into the state of the bodies of the hikers when they're found. Because spoiler alert, they do all die. Just to kind of give you a quick idea of how we're doing things today. This would be great.
And this was a impromptu decision today.
Mm-hmm.
We went to a very cute little cafe bookstore where they have Willow's book in Pine Forest, Florida. And it is the cutest little coffee shop with a bookstore inside. And I just literally couldn't figure out where I wanted to sit because every little location in little nooks and stuff were just adorable.
It is. It is the most adorable bookstore. Mm-hmm. It's called the Idle Reader in Mrs. Jones Cold Brew Coffee. And they're going to be hosting my book launch for my second book that's going to be out next year. But this place is so cute. And we were sitting there talking podcasts and talking books. And we already had a podcast planned for tonight. And we were like, we should probably come up with another one, a second one to record. And are you ready, Karisa, for me to reiterate?
Absolutely ready. Yes.
Yeah, kind of reiterate what we've heard, but in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah. And I've got some theories to throw you down a rabbit hole.
Yes, I know. She literally told me we're in the car coming back. And she's all like, I have a theory about this, but I'm not going to tell you yet. And I was like, Karisa, why would you be like, I have a theory, but you don't get to know?
A completely, way out there theory. But
yeah. Hey,
We'll
it's
tackle
fun
that.
though. There's a
Yes.
lot of way out there theories with this one.
Yes.
So,
As there should be.
exactly. So this takes place back in early February of 1959. A group of 10 students struck out on a ski trip with a goal to get to Mount Ortorten in Russia. The trip was going to take them into the Ural Mountains, which is a range that divides Europe and Asia. All of the skiers were experienced young sportsmen and women from the Urals Polytechnic Institute in Yekaterinburg.
I will take it.
This group consisted of 8 men and 2 women. It was led by Igor Dyatlov, who was in his 5th year of radio engineering, and he was also one of the most experienced athletes in that group. Then there was Zeneda or Zina. She was 22. Yuri Doroshenko, who was 21. There was Alexander Kolotov, who was 24. Another Yuri, this one was Yuri Krivonishenko. He was 23. Rustam Slobodin, who was also 23, and Nikolai Thibault Briganol, who was also 23. Lastly, we had Ludmila Dubanina, who was 20, Yuri Yudin, who was 22, and Semyon Zolotarov, who was 38 years old.
I'm giving you first place prize for pronouncing all those names amazingly.
Thank you. Yeah. I just had to Zeneda Kolmogorova. That one kind of got me there for a second. And again, that actually, how I just pronounce all of these may not even be accurate, but
it sounded
works.
accurate.
Thank you. I just had to act confident.
Yeah, we're going to go with it.
So this group had been given a trail from the indigenous Mansi people who had inhabited the region for hundreds of years. And they're still there in the same region as well. In fact, the Mansi language, many people claim that the name of the mountain or Torten translates to don't go there. However, in my research, I did find an article written by a journalist who actually went along the trail of the hikers, and she spoke with the Mansi tribe, and they said that the word actually means mountain with swirling winds, and that the previous translation, don't go there, is a mistranslation, or it's somebody just wanting to kind of invent a name. There's that little thing. Dyatlov had promised to send a message to the sports club as soon as the group was back at their little base, their little safe place where they were going to be. Just before they continued on to Mount Ortorten, however, Yuri Yudin had to leave the group due to severe sciatic pain that was flaring up and preventing him from continuing on with the hike, which I get sciatic pain. It stops you in your tracks. There ain't no way with the amount of pain that can cause. There's no way he would have been able to continue to do all of this. But I guess he probably feels lucky now because he was the only one who survived. The rest of the group was supposed to make contact again around February 12th. It wasn't abnormal for skiing groups or hiking groups to be a few days late due to changing weather patterns and such on the mountains.
That's how it is in Florida.
Yes,
Florida
exactly.
Weather.
Yeah.
Literally
yeah. So you look and you're like, wow, it's so beautiful. And then you look on the other side of your house and it's actually pouring down rain.
Or you look on the other side and you're like, oh, there's a hurricane, but over here I'm on the beach.
Actually, it's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. So that's like how it is on the mountain, except it's snow and ice and, avalanches and stuff. However, by February 20th, the families and friends of the group still hadn't heard from them and they began to become worried. Around this time was when the university also went ahead and sent out a search party of student volunteers. They were later joined by actual policemen and stuff, but it started out with just the students. And what's crazy is the place that I did a lot of my research on is at a website that's organized by this group of investigators who is dedicated literal decades to finding everything they can about this case. And most of these bodies were discovered by students, which is kind of wild to me. I guess if you hike a lot, maybe it's something you're used to, because I know that on some of the major hiking trails of the mountains, if people die, they just leave them there because it's actually too dangerous for them to even go and retrieve the body until a specific time. But still, oof, I don't even know. It's spooky. Speaking of finding the bodies, on February 26, 1959, they discovered the group's tent on the slope of Kholat Sakhil on the Dyatlov Pass, and that's the specific mountain that they were on at the time. As they uncovered more of the tent, it became obvious that it had been cut up from the inside. So they had literally cut themselves out of the tent instead of just like unzipping it or leaving through
Which is
the
crazy. Like,
entrance.
how did I'm just wondering how they understand that it did that.
They said that they accidentally figured out that it was cut from the inside because there was a seamstress who came into like the investigation like area where the tent was like propped up, and she was there just to go mend the uniform of like one of the investigators, but she took one look at the tent and said, "Oh, that was cut from the inside." And so then they did more forensic investigation and were able to figure out that that was true. It was cut from the inside.
Interesting.
I know. I was like, whoa. I mean, I guess if you spent your entire life sewing and such, you probably would have figured that out. But I was like, that's
Yeah.
crazy that she took one look and said, this was cut from the inside.
Yeah.
At the bottom of the tent were 9 backpacks, so 9 backpacks of all the hikers, with various personal items such as jackets, raincoats, and then their 9 pairs of shoes. Multiple different items of food and personal belongings were still left inside the tent as well. Just outside the tent was also discovered Dyatlov's jacket. It was strange that Dyatlov had taken his jacket off outside the tent instead of carrying it with him. Like he left in such a hurry that he either dropped it or just took it off. It's weird. Another odd thing was that inside the tent was a plate full of, I believe it's pronounced solo, which is white pork fat. It's a Slavic delicacy, and it's the kind of high-calorie food that most hikers take with them on these journeys so that they have enough food and energy to hold them over. Mikhail Sherevin, who was a student volunteer from the search party who actually found the first 2 bodies, he was one of the first people who found the tent as well and like went in and looked inside it. And he mentioned that the food was sliced up as if they were literally getting ready to have supper and didn't even have the time to eat it. So that's how quickly they left this tent. Something scared them so bad that they didn't even bother to finish their food. And apparently, as you'll see, didn't even bother to put on all of their clothes. Another thing to note about the location of the tent is that it was erected on the eastern slope of the mountain. They had erected it in a shallow pit, which presumably had been dug to shelter the group from the wind. But mountaineers and hikers typically don't set up camp on the slope of the mountain because of the danger of avalanches and the fact that where they were on the slope, and I guess in particular, I guess on slopes in general, this is where the coldest air can collect. So it's usually colder, like in this area than it is anywhere else. I'm not a hiker. I'm not a mountaineer. So this is just based on research.
Which makes you wonder why they did that.
Yeah. Yeah. The main thing I was seeing was that people were like, well, maybe they didn't want to lose any, I guess, height, quote unquote, from where they were hiking because they were only about 300 meters from the peak of the mountain.
Is that called the summit?
Okay, maybe, yeah, the summit. So I guess they just didn't want to, some people say they just didn't want to lose that, I keep trying to say mileage, but distance. Good Lord.
Yeah.
It's like they don't want to lose that mileage. Anywho, I just accidentally scrolled all the way to the top of my notes. On February 27th, 1959, they discovered the first 2 bodies of the remaining 9 in the group. These were the bodies of Krivonoshenko and Doroshenko. Doroshenko was face down and Krivonoshenko was found face up. Now, before I get into the description of the bodies, because there's a lot of details, I'm going to give you a super quick, brief timeline of how everything happened. Essentially, the dates we need to know is February 1st, the group makes a cache or a labaz to lighten their backpacks. It's like they built like almost like a raised table, so to speak, out of wood where they leave their stuff. It's high enough that it won't get covered by the snow, but they can come back to it later. And they cover about 200 kilometers and they pitch their tent in the north slope of the mountain. And on February 2nd is when they believe that all members of the Dyatlov group die. February 12th, they were expected back at their little safe base or wherever. February 21st is when they sent out the search parties. February 26th is when they found the tent. The next day, the 27th, is when they started finding bodies. So that's going to be Doroshenko, Krivonoshenko, Dyatlov, and Kolmogorova. So 4 bodies are found on February 27th. On March 5th, they found the body of Slobodan. May 5th is when they found the den that had the rest of them 3 months later.
Which is crazy.
Mm-hmm. So there's that. You can always go
Weren't
back
they,
and
like,
re-listen to
deep
it.
under the snow?
Yes. And I'll get into that in a while here, but I think it was like 50 meters under the snow. Like it was deep under the snow. One of the first photos to circulate of the scene when they found Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, it does show the checkered shirt that Krivonishenko was wearing, and that apparently actually started like a legend or a rumor that the bodies were covered with a blanket and left like burial style. They weren't. It's just in the one of the first photos that went around, you can just see his checkered shirt. Unfortunately, I did see these photos, and they're not for the faint of heart, but you can see it kind of looks like they're both covered, but when I look closer, you can tell that it's just their clothing. Doroshenko was found wearing a sleeveless cotton undershirt, a short-sleeved checkered shirt with 2 empty breast pockets and all 6 buttons fastened, shorts and swimming trunks, and blue cotton underpants. That's no socks, that's no jacket, that's no real pants, no hat, no gloves, nothing. That's it. That's all he's wearing. Mm-hmm. Well, I lied, actually. He was wearing 2 different sets of wool socks on both feet, but the socks on his left foot were both burnt. It was noted that he had livor mortis spots on the back of his neck, torso, and extremities, which was not consistent with the position of his body when it was found. And that indicates that his body was actually moved a good amount of time after he had already passed. The autopsy report goes as follows. His ears, nose, and lips were covered in blood, and they noticed a dark bruise and swollen upper lip as well. There was a gray foamy discharge that covered his right cheek and some more gray liquid in his open mouth, which suggested pulmonary edema. I did hear, I believe in the podcast and read in a few other places, that this could be a sign of like massive trauma to the chest, like a blunt force trauma to the chest. But I didn't see a whole lot in the autopsy report besides just there was foam. There were 2 abrasions on the inner surface of his right shoulder and 2 cuts on the skin, as well as a bruise on his right armpit. There was also bruises on the upper third of his right forearm, small abrasions on the rear of his right hand, a bruise on the back of his right hand, and his toes and fingertips were severely frostbitten to the point where if he would have survived, they would have had to amputate all of his fingers and toes. The inner surface of his left shoulder had an abrasion, as well as the inner surfaces of the left elbow and left forearm, and similar bruises were on the shins of both legs. This is pretty consistent with their theory of him climbing the tree he was found under, because he and Krivonishenko were found under a cedar tree right next to each other, and they both shared similar injuries of like trying to climb and getting all of the scratches and abrasions from the bark all over you. They noted a smaller amount of urine left in his bladder than what they would have expected in somebody who had died of hypothermia. That means the body was still making efforts to fight off the cold at the time of his death. I guess people who die from hypothermia apparently have a significantly more amount of urine in their bladder. I'm not 100% positive why, but that was a note that they made. But his cause of death was still officially stated to be hypothermia. So, like I said, Krivonishenko was discovered with Doroshenko underneath the cedar tree. He was dressed in an undershirt, a long-sleeved checkered shirt, swimming pants, long underpants, and a torn sock on his left foot, but no other footwear. So again, no jacket, no real pants, no hat, nothing. Like practically unclothed.
Is this the other guy?
Yes, they were found together.
So they both had checkered shirts?
They both had what?
Checkered shirts?
Yes. Yeah. So Krivonishenko had bruises on his forehead, diffuse bleeding on the right temporal occipital region due to damage on the temporalis muscle. So that is your temples. So it's from your temples to the back of kind of the back part of your head. The tip of his nose was missing, but they thought that was probably because it was bitten off by an animal because there were no traces of blood around it. So there was no blood like coming from. Yeah, yeah. He had frostbitten ears. A portion of skin from his right hand was found in his mouth, and the back of his right hand was swollen, and obviously part of the skin was gone. The palm of his right hand was bruised, and there were multiple scratches on his fingers and palms of both hands, again, which is consistent with him climbing like Doroshenko in the tree. They also found an abrasion on the right side of his chest, pale red abrasions along his clavicle, as well as his left wrist, and the back of his left hand was swollen. There were multiple cuts along his thighs, as well as bruises up and down his legs, consistent again with their theory that he had been climbing the tree. They also found a burn on the entire outer surface of his left leg, as well as the significant burn on his left foot. His official cause of death was also ruled to be hypothermia. There is a theory that the presence of the skin between his teeth, like in his mouth where he bit the back of his hand, might have been him biting his hand to waken it when he was climbing, because if he was severely frostbitten like Doroshenko, his hands could have stopped like responding. He's not able to control them as well. So he might have bitten it to try and get some feeling back inside them. Or it could have also been to stifle some kind of cry, which I thought maybe when he was burnt, he's like biting his hand because it hurts. I don't know. That was just a thought I had. While most of these findings for both Krivonoshenko and Doroshenko are consistent with the bodies of people who have frozen to death, it doesn't exactly explain why they weren't wearing most of their clothes. Now, some people will say, oh, it's, when some people are hypothermic, they will take off all their clothes. But apparently only 20% of the population who is affected by hypothermia will do that. And I actually have more information from my research that might actually explain this. So get ready, Karissa.
Yeah, because I'm
Get
like, first
ready.
of all, you got 9 people, and you got a ratio of this many people not having their clothing on. That's
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make any sense
Mm-hmm.
that you'd have
No,
this many people without.
it's about to get really morbid.
Okay,
Because
I'm ready.
I'm not. Oh, I'm about to tell you why it's going to get morbid here in just a second. So Igor Dyatlov was also found on the same day, February 27th, about 300 meters from the cedar tree. The next two bodies I believe next three I'm about to discuss, were all found like almost equidistant from each other and almost in a line from the cedar tree. And I have thoughts, and I will tell you them in a little bit, but I have thoughts. So Igor Dyatlov was found face up with his head pointing towards the tent. He had unbuttoned the first few buttons of his sleeveless vest and was wearing a blue sweater, long sleeve red cotton shirt, blue sleeveless cotton singlet, ski pants over his pants as well, but he was not wearing any shoes. He did have on one cotton sock on his left foot and one woolen sock on his right foot. Now, the sole survivor of the trip, Yuri Yudin, the one who stayed back because he was having the sciatic flare, would later say, and this is where I'm going to make it kind of morbid, he would later say that the red cotton shirt was something that Yuri himself had given to Doroshenko. So this leads to the theory that the rest of the group was still with or had found Krivonoshenko and Doroshenko when or close to when they had died.
And they took their clothes off.
Yep, who undressed their bodies and left them where they were. Because remember, I think it was Doroshenko whose livor mortis didn't fit.
Yeah, because he was face down, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, and forensic anthropology will tell you that based on when your body dies, based on where you start getting some of that resting of the blood pools, that's where they
Mm-hmm.
know if you died there or you moved there. Like there's a lot of things that point to how you died or where you died or how long you've been dead based on where you start seeing the blood pooling.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that I was like, oh my gosh.
But I mean, if they're dead and you're cold, you would take their clothes.
You'd have to. It's survival. Let's see. So Dyatlov's injuries consisted of minor abrasions on his forehead and upper eyelids, some abrasions above the left eyebrow, as well as some more on his left cheek. Blood was dried on his lips, so as if he was either vomiting blood or just bleeding from his mouth, but they didn't actually state where. Anywho, major bruising around both ankles, as well as a cut on the lower third of his right leg. There were also many small scratches on the lower third of his right forearm and his right palm, as well as a bruise on the back side of his right hand. There were also multiple bruises along the knuckles of specifically his right hand. Some reports, I think, said on his left hand, but I guess he's right-handed. So the worst of the bruising was on his right hand. And this is a common injury to the hand in hand-to-hand combat. So like he was punching something, like fighting something. They also noted superficial wounds on the second and fifth finger of the left hand. He did not have any internal injuries, so they concluded that the cause of death was also hypothermia. But what's he fighting? How did he die? They say hypothermia, but like, anyway.
Well, question.
Mm-hmm.
Do any of his external markings of like where he's fighting something, do they happen to match the two prior victims? So if we're doing a timeline where those two died first and then the other ones are moving on, do his wounds match any of the consistencies of like the bruising and stuff on the other guys?
Not on those two in particular.
Okay.
But they are somewhat similar to another one. I can't remember which one. It's like I wrote down everybody's names several times because I knew I wasn't going to be able to remember them. But I think it was also somebody who was found in this group, but I'm not 100% positive. But we'll get to it. They do match somebody else's, or they're similar to somebody else's injuries. So secondly, also on the 27th in this line that we're going from, away from the cedar tree is Zina Kolmogorova. She was found about 650 meters from the cedar tree, and she was found face down, also with her head towards the tent. So like as if they're going towards the tent. Now, this cedar tree, the way that it was cut, because they could see that there were branches that had broken from, if somebody was climbing it, but they also saw several branches that were cut as if somebody's like trying to get, wood for a fire, for example. And apparently in the clearing where they were with this tree, if you had climbed to a particular height, you could see the tent. So like it's far from the tent, but if you climb to a particular height, you can still see it. So like they still know the direction they have to go to get back to the tent at this time is what I'm assuming.
Or they tore themselves out of it.
Yes. So why are they looking back? Why are these people like desperate to climb up this tree to look back? What are they looking for? So again, Kolmogorova was also found with her head facing towards the tent. However, she was better dressed than the previous bodies, as she had on 2 hats, a long sleeve undershirt, a sweater, a checkered shirt, and another sweater with a torn off cuff on the right sleeve. From the waist down, she was wearing cotton sport pants, trousers, ski pants with 3 small holes in the bottom of the right trouser leg, and 3 pairs of socks, but no other footwear. Upon examination of her body, they found abrasions to her right frontal eminence, which I think is like the where your eyebrow is. Abrasions on her upper eyelids, a graze on the bridge and upper tip of her nose, numerous abrasions on her left cheekbone, bruises on the right side of her face, abrasions on the back of both hands, missing skin on the back of her right hand at the base of her third finger, frostbite on all of her fingers, and a large bruise in the lumbar region on the right side of her torso, which many have said looked like a bruise left from a baton. So lumbar, that's like a roughly kind of mid-lower back-ish area. Yeah. It's either the autopsy report or the investigation later when they were questioning the medical examiner. He described it as a bruise that looks like it was left from a baton. Like those are his words. But he still ruled her death as hypothermia due to a violent accident. It's noted too, and I think in the one I was reading, but in some other articles, that the position of her body seemed as if she had been trying to scramble uphill back towards the tent. Like she had died trying to get back there. Next we have Rustam Slobodin, who was found on March 5th, 480 meters from the cedar tree. And he had been covered by about 50 centimeters of snow. So he was well, snowed in, shall we say. He was within the line of people leading away from the cedar tree. All three of them in the same area with their head pointing towards the tent.
Their heads back.
Mm-hmm. He was dressed in a long sleeve undershirt, a regular shirt, sweater, 2 pairs of pants, 4 pairs of socks, and 1 felt boot on his right foot. His injuries consisted of hemorrhages on the temporalis muscle. Again, that's the bruising along your temples here. A bruise on his upper eyelid of the right eye. Traces of blood from his nose, swelling along his nose, and multiple small abrasions on both sides of his face. Bruises along both knuckles. So he has the same injuries on his hands as Dyatlov that like you get when you're in hand-to-hand combat, when you're like punching somebody, as well as bruises on the medial aspect of his left arm and left palm. So medial aspect is the part of any part of your body that is close to the median plane, which is the middle of your body. So it's essentially like the inside of your arm. There was also a fracture on the frontal bone along the sagittal suture. So that is your forehead. So a fracture on his forehead, specifically close to his hairline, because the sagittal suture is where your skull comes together along the top of your head, like right in the middle.
Soft spot comes together.
Yep. And that's right where they had noted that fracture. The medical examiner suggested that the fracture on his skull could have been done with a blunt object. The autopsy further stated that, I have to go back to Slobodin to make sure I was going to pronounce his name correctly, probably suffered a loss of coordination due to the initial shock right after the blow had occurred, which could have sped up his death from hypothermia. So they're essentially saying after that fracture happened, he was either becoming unconscious or he wasn't really able to control himself anymore. So like really dizzy, unstable, unbalanced, that type of thing. They still ended up calling his cause of death hypothermia officially, but they didn't seem to come up with an official reason as for how he attained such a dramatic injury on his skull.
I mean, that's kind of like people that die, people that have AIDS per se. They don't die. You don't die of AIDS. You have AIDS, but you die of the causes of like a cold or the flu because your body can't fight it off anymore. So you don't ever technically die of AIDS. You're dying of whatever it is that you have that your body can't fight off. So whatever essentially came after them, physical, metaphysical, extraterrestrial, whatever, it was not the cause of death, technically. It was leaving them there at that point to where their body could not recover from the hypothermia.
Yeah. It's just wild that they are like, oh, hypothermia, but then they aren't coming up with any kind of like...
Well, no, it's definitely
like they're
normal.
not suspicious about anything else.
I think they are. But
well, I think
it's like us trying to record this podcast.
Yeah, they are. But like, are they allowed to be suspicious of it? Because we're not, apparently. So the remaining 4 members of the group weren't found until May. Like I said, May 5th is when they were finally found, about 3 months later, when the snow began to melt. And they were found in this almost ravine type situation where they had dug themselves a literal den where they had found like remnants of a fire. So it was almost like they had tried to dig themselves this shelter. And I just want to note that these 4 bodies were found in this den-like structure that they had dug. We'll begin with Ludmila Dubinina, who was found in a kneeling position. Some say almost as if she were pleading for mercy. She was wearing a short sleeve shirt as well as a long sleeve shirt, I believe either over top or underneath that, and 2 sweaters. The brown sweater she was wearing actually belonged to Krivonoshenko, which is furthering that theory that the survivors of the group are the ones who had undressed Doroshenko and Krivonoshenko. And that sweater was later tested to be radioactive. So she's wearing his literally radioactive sweater. She was also wearing underwear, long socks, and 2 pairs of pants. The external pair of pants was badly damaged by a fire and was very ripped up. She was wearing a small hat and 2 pairs of socks. Dubinina had apparently also, in a last-ditch attempt to preserve her feet, she had taken off one of her sweaters. I don't know if it was the brown one or something, or a different one. And she had cut it into two pieces. Half of it she had wrapped around her left foot, and the other half she'd either left or unintentionally dropped in the snow. Her autopsy report consisted of soft tissue missing around her eyes, eyebrows, and nose. Her left cheekbone was also partially exposed, and there were damaged tissues around the left temporal bone. Again, bone on the temple. Her eye sockets were also completely empty because her eyeballs were gone. They were missing. The nose cartilage was broken and flattened, so her literal nose was also flat. And the soft tissue of her upper lip was gone, exposing her upper jaw and teeth. I did see pictures, and it is haunting, and I don't recommend it if you are sensitive at all. And her tongue was missing.
Yeah. Not just
her
missing.
tongue was gone. It was
Like,
ripped out. Yes, it was gone. The ribs, specifically 2, 3, 4, and 5, were all broken on the right side of her torso, and the ribs 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 were broken on her left side. There was a massive hemorrhage found in her heart in the right atrium, and there was also a bruise in the middle of her left thigh. Now, I know you and I listened to this podcast on the way back from our coffee date today, in which they had stated that there was a massive amount of blood found in her stomach, which indicated that she was alive when her tongue was removed. However, Karissa, I read the autopsy report, the translated autopsy report. So are things lost in translation? Maybe. But in the medical records, it simply states that the tongue was missing, as well as the hypoglossal muscle and the muscles of the floor of the mouth, which when they were saying the root of the tongue, that's what it is. Like, it's the floor of the mouth is gone, and the muscle back here in your throat is also gone. It also said, are you covering your mouth right now? You're like, oh God.
No, I'm intrigued. No, I'm just intrigued listening. I'm totally just like intrigued listening.
So it also did state that there was a brown mucosal mass found in the stomach, which many people mistranslated to congealed blood. But again, that's not what it says in the medical records. The medical records don't even say, like, I'm assuming this is blood, or we later tested and found out it's blood. All it says is brown mucosal mass. Now, whether that does actually define a mucosal mass of congealed blood that you can lift, because obviously when blood congeals, it does become a mass, and she was frozen. Or when you're saying brown mucosal mass, you could also quite literally be talking about a mass or a tumor in the mucosa of the stomach that is brown in color. So is it actually congealed blood? Don't know. I think that makes the most sense, but it's not explicitly stated, so we don't know. The cause of death was later stated to be a hemorrhage due to the right atrium of the heart, as well as multiple fractured ribs that would have caused internal bleeding. Next was Semyon Zolotarov. He was also found with both of his eyes missing. He was missing soft tissues around his left eyebrow, and his bone was exposed, which is somewhat similar to Dubinina. Sorry, I had to check on her name. As well as an open wound on the right side of his skull that left some of the bone exposed. He also had ribs 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 broken on the right side of his torso, with the same fracture lines as what was found on Dubinina's body. He was found well-dressed in a black fur winter cap with ear flaps, a worn wool scarf, a ski mask, a worn fur waistcoat, a buttoned brown sports jacket, a cotton sports t-shirt, a black cotton sweater, khaki denim trousers, quilted belt, boots, and several socks. So he's well insulated against the cold. He was found with a camera around his neck, but Yuri Yudin ended up testifying that he had never seen that camera before. He had said that I believe there were 4 cameras on the trip, and this 5th one that Zolotarov was wearing was not one that he recognized. Another thing to note about these two bodies in particular is that they both sustained an interesting pattern of injuries. They're very similar in the direction and force, despite the size difference between the two people, specifically those injuries to their torsos or the fractured ribs. This would suggest that whatever caused those injuries was not a single uniform event, and those injuries are actually very similar, apparently, to the type of trauma that results from a shockwave of a bomb. So what that means, I don't know, but that is literally what the medical examiner said. We have just a few more to go. We are almost done. Next we found was Alexander Kolotov wearing a sleeveless shirt, long sleeve shirt, sweater, fleece sweater, and ski jacket with the zipper unzipped. He was missing a hat and shoes. The waistband of his sweater and the lower parts of his trousers did later test to be radioactive as well. His list of injuries include a lack of soft tissues around the eyes, his eyebrows were missing, and his skull bones were exposed. There was also an open wound behind his ear. A deformed neck is literally what they said. I don't know exactly what that means, if it means like broken neck, but just deformed neck. And diffuse bleeding in the underlying tissues of the left knee. So his death was also ruled as hypothermia. The last member was Nikolai Thibault-Brignol. It was suggested that he and Zolotarov might have been outside the tent at the time of the mysterious threat that struck the group, because they were both found with shoes and were covered in several layers of clothes. So again, Thibault-Brignol is very well insulated against the cold, very similar to Zolotarov. Upon examination of his body, he was found to have multiple fractures to the temporal bone with extension to the frontal and sphenoid bones. So the sphenoid bone is what makes the back portion of your eye orbits. So he's got fractures to the temporal bone, which again is your temples, but it extends like inside his skull into the bone that creates the back part of his eye orbit. There was a bruise on the upper lip on the left side of his face, as well as a hemorrhage on the lower forearm. I think I heard that that arm was fractured, but I didn't read that it was. But it did say that there was heavy bruising there. So I'm not 100% positive on that one. The fracture on his temporal bone that went into his frontal bone, which again, bone makes up your forehead, and the sphenoid bone was quite significant, and the medical examiner did say that he did not believe those injuries could have been the result of him simply falling from the level of his own height, like just tripping and falling and hitting his head. He described the fracture as extensive, depressed, and multi-splintered, and stated that the fracture could be the result of an impact of an automobile moving at a high speed. So this is an extensive, massive injury.
This is the one that doesn't have
This was
evidence.
this was the last one. This was Thibault-Brignol. And let me see. When the medical examiner was actually being questioned during the investigation they did, he was asked if it was possible that Thibault-Brignol was hit by a rock in somebody's hand. And he stated that if that was the case, he would have seen some kind of trauma to the soft tissue of Thibault-Brignol's head, but there wasn't any damage to the soft tissue. There was just massive fracture inside his skull, but nothing on like his skin. So he said, it couldn't be that he was like hit by somebody just manually like, hitting him with a rock or something. But then he didn't provide an explanation of like, besides him being struck by a car. Yet his death.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as to be expected, his death was ruled as a result of the fracture to his skull that caused massive hemorrhaging inside his brain.
Right. Well, and so I looked that up, and some of the, of course, options that would cause internal damaging, like you've been hit by a car, but not show any kind of external wounds on the soft tissue. And they said it would be consistent with rapid internal hemorrhaging, like the tissue just ruptures. So like if all that's going on, plus you're cold and everything, that's very possible that could have happened.
Well, and the other thing is, if there was some kind of internal pressure, because of course, since he's frozen and he's dead, I don't know how easy it is for them to tell about the possibility of swelling in the brain or changes in pressure in the skull that could have made it explode outward. However, based on what I could read from the report and the way that he was describing it, he did describe the fracture as depressed, which sounds as if it is depressed inward. It is fractured inward, which would indicate force from the outside going in rather than the inside going out. If he was struck by something, it would have had to be something very blunt. So no sharp edges, something very blunt, moving at a very, very fast speed or with a significant amount of power behind it to cause that particular injury.
Well, and and we have to also realize that this is kind of like even though autopsies have been around or have been around since like early AD.
Like forever.
Well, like
Not forever, but yeah.
yeah, for quite a while, for a couple thousand years. Modern autopsies were obviously not till like the 19th century. So this is the 19th century. These are still like new learning curves. We're still learning why it does these things. We might notice these things, but we don't know why they do them 100%. We just can recognize them.
Yeah.
Which, crazy enough, one of my forensic anthropology classes, I found out there is an actual body farm, which you probably already know this.
Yeah, I know this.
In Kentucky.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Kentucky Body Farm,
The
where they
Kentucky
just
Body
leave
Farm.
bodies out in different types of environments to see how they decompose.
Mhm.
So then they can figure out, it helps them with figuring out time of death, but also forensics. It helps them to figure out,
I want to know though, like
certain
when they're
things.
taking these bodies, how do they get them there so fast to know the decomposition, or are they killing them?
I feel like when you're sitting there, you're like, I'm going to donate my body to science. In reality, all you're saying is you're donating yourself to the body farm.
Yes.
You're just donating yourself so people can watch you decompose.
Yep. I did see
That's
that in
it.
the video. When you donate your body to science, you're probably going to end up at the body farm.
Yeah, you're literally donating yourself to the body farm. That's all you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, what I was going to say at the end of all of this insanity of me just describing to you what happened to these people and how they were found. So I'm interested to hear your theories, because I know that on several different podcasts, they discuss theories. No matter what, I believe these people saw something that they weren't supposed to see. And the way that they're described, the way they're found, and the fact that people are now speculating that the two first members that were found under the cedar tree had died first, and the rest of the surviving members took their clothes, and there's actually proof of that. It almost sounds as if they were hunted. Like that the survivors, because again, whenever those four bodies that were found last, it's going to take some time for them to dig out that little den and start a fire. And their injuries, the longest that somebody could have survived in that group with the injuries that all these people had was maybe 2 to 3 hours. And there's no way you're digging out a den with those kinds of injuries. So they were alive for a period of time before they sustained those injuries. They must have been. And so that's why I was thinking about this while I was eating my spaghetti. Okay. I was like, oh, they were hunted. Literally, they could not live to tell the tale.
So, all right. We listened to this, and I wanted to kind of, first of all, the Mansi people, do you know that they herd reindeer?
Yeah, they're indigenous reindeer herders.
Yeah.
I love it so much.
Yeah. But a lot of their culture doesn't really come into play about this, other than I wanted to kind of deep dive into some of their beliefs of the creatures that they feel exist in the area. And they have a lot, and they are very their beliefs are based in a lot of the spiritual essence of nature and a lot of the objects of phenomenon that come with that. They're in tune with a lot of the earth gods,
Okay. Yeah.
spiritual gods. I mean, they have a very they have a pantheon of gods per se, and spirits. They have a supreme deity, but for the most part, there are a lot of different gods and things for fertility. There's things for this. So they pay a lot of respect to a lot of the different things, as we've talked previously in the podcast. They perform rituals. So these are very spiritual people. So anyways, but I wanted to kind of dive into some of their mythical creatures that might possibly be talking about. I know the podcast that we listened to talked about the Yeti, but the Yeti is not their creature.
I was gonna say
Um,
that one I think is more like westernized or specifically
well, that's
Russian
more like the
compared to
Himalayans.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the Yeti is more of a Himalayan thing. Um, and it's actually there's even like other ones that have strangely been translated. What's crazy is based on whether it's the Yeti, whether it's the Yenin, whether it's this one, which is the Menk, like whatever it is, it depends on the culture and how they decide whether they find it as a respectful protector, that they're like, hey, don't mess with it. It is protecting us. It's in charge of the wind. It's in charge of the avalanches. So we respect it. Don't disturb it. Um, so some of them are looked at as like these mighty gods, but like at the same time, you just don't approach. So not approaching those areas with caution would be probably coming from a deep set understanding that you don't disturb their place. Now, let's go into some of the things that so this particular Menk, this is a type of forest spirit in the Mansi mythology that is believed to inhabit this area, and particularly these dense forests and mountain ranges of the Ural region. But the cool thing about that I was reading on this thing is that some of its known habits don't seem to match these encounters and their markings.
Hmm.
So one of the things that when you were talking about when you're talking about the bruises and stuff, everybody seemed to have facial injuries
Yes, everybody did.
in the same spots, almost like a trained person would hit you in the same spots, knowing where it's going to have the most impact of you lying and dying. So
Yes.
that for me would point to somebody that is trained military or
Yes.
trained combatant in some sort, whether they're human or not human. Because we did throw around the theory that possibly maybe the military found one of the creatures here and did a little genetic testing because we know genetics was actually going on back then.
Yeah,
Um,
because you and I talked about that on the ride home, how
mhm,
the
yes.
possibility of them genetically altering something for one reason
Yeah.
or another.
Yeah, and this is this is kind of like the training area. Not to
Hmm.
mention that the US government, did you ever find that? The US government had like a whole like how to deal with essentially
How to
Yetis
deal with a
and
Yeti.
yeah, after all this happened, which is not even a Yeti, it's the mink, but so the mink is different than the Yeti, but at the same time, it's like the US government's like, "Hey, if we got people over there, we need to know how to deal with these things." Like, "Wait, what?"
Let me see if I can find, because I remember us.
Yes. Okay, so
Yes, a
oral tra
1959 U.S. government memo outlined rules created by the Nepalese government, advised against killing a Yeti, except in self defense, required permits for expeditions, and mandated the surrender of any evidence of the Yeti to Nepal. It was the Yeti memo. I love that.
So, oh yeah, so that was one that was fun. It's like very interesting that they had even put that out. All right, so the
Right.
Menk has there's encounters and these sightings of the Menk by the Mensi people that live in the region, which the region itself is not as populated as it used to be. And they in the region there's actual stories, ghost stories of people just vanishing, which we could probably go down at some other point. So I'm
Oh,
reading like just
dear.
this culture itself. What?
I said, oh, dear.
Mhm. Yes. But, the people often reported describing these encounters with these mysterious large creatures that kind of have a description that's part human, part creature. Just depends on essentially what era of translation and, that you're reading it from. More modern translations are gonna be different than what they used to be back then, because
Hmm.
stories change.
Yeah.
Um, but it is considered to be a guardian or protector of those wild places, and supposed to be respected and feared at the same time. But so that I just want to kind of give the cryptology of like what that creature is, because that seems to be like one of the things that people put onto the folklore of this surrounding this incident.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Yes, but I wanted to kind of do some theoretical like thoughts. Theoretical weapons that might cause internal damage without external signs or whatever. Those could be like literally a technology that's capable of causing these injuries with like um, like a microwave almost. We've talked about that in the Cayenne case, because a lot of the internal stuff was damaged, but there's no external, like, other than the burn marks and stuff.
Mhm,
And they
mhm.
had burn marks, that we assumed was from fires, but we also assumed that why are all of these people falling in a fire? Why are they all getting burned?
That's true.
Um,
Why are they all getting burned? Why are they all? And again, another reason why I was sitting there saying I feel like they were hunted. Like, why are they climbing up that tree and looking back? Why are they trying to go back? What is coming after them? And even with you talking about things, theoretical weapons that could cause this kind of damage without having as many external signs. I believe it was either in that podcast or maybe I read it, but they were talking about possible things with some kind of like sonic energy, like just being able to
well, yeah, so,
manipulate
like
energy in such a way that you are able to affect somebody internally without having
right.
that show on the
Right. So,
outside.
yeah, so that would be ultrasonic or like an acoustic type
Yeah.
weapon. So the microwave or like the high energy laser type stuff, that would be more of a direct energy weapon. So
Hmm.
if you're talking like an ultrasonic or an acoustic type weapon, these are like devices that emit a high intense ultrasound or waves that could do that. This like exposure would probably induce those internal hemorrhaging that we were talking about, that rupturing of
Hmm.
tissue. Yeah, that would definitely do that. So that's a different yeah, that's definitely a different theoretical weapon, that would emit that type of high intense ultrasound. Um, there's also targeted biological things, I'm wondering if back then there was any kind of understanding because we were kind of at that point, we didn't really have any understanding of LSD on the global concept.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, like, any kind of, like, things that would've caused hallucinations even. Because here's my thoughts. How they died and how they were beaten is a secondary thing to why they left the tent. This
Hmm.
tent housed them in this tent. What made them want to escape? Something either psychedelically happened, something
Hmm.
dark and sinister showed up, and they're, like, all trying to get out really quickly, and then 2 of them die, and now that they realize 2 of them have died from whatever they're running from, these ones have to get back to the camp to try and get all of their gear so they can maybe make it back down,
Hmm.
to the end,
Yeah.
um, and survive. It's almost like something's in the tent, they all have to get out immediately.
Hmm.
2 die trying to get up in the tree, all these things are happening, like, there's a fire, we're trying to survive, but, like, then they find them dead, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, whatever this was has killed them. Now we gotta get through here," and they're dying in succession. Whatever they're trying to
Hmm.
fight off, they're
Hmm.
also using their fists with, and the last 4 escape, and they're hiding. They're because obviously anything's capable. That took me down another little rabbit hole. If it's not a Menk or a Yeti type, we've talked about demons, we've talked about dark
Hmm.
energy, we've talked about stuff like that. Things that can mess with you internally, things that can do things internally. So imagine a creature, a witch or a vampire types, and there are these types of things in mythology. A lot of them are Japanese, like the Oni is Japanese, so it wouldn't really kind of translate over this way because that's kind of like, the island off of Russia.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
But then we assume that demons can't travel across water.
Which is like horrible, but yeah.
Well, so the Oni is a demonic being. Yeah, right.
Hmm.
So the Oni is a demonic being that often is depicted as violent and very brutal. And there are stories that suggest that it eats flesh and sometimes will even target the eyes or other sensitive parts of the victims. Okay.
Which the every single one of them, we had two that were missing their eyes, one that's missing their tongue, but every single one of them started with a lot of injuries to their
Hmm.
face.
Yeah, yeah. Then there's the Striga or the Strega. Now this, so I'm thinking, what I did was I kind of like cast my net out around Russia and
Hmm.
Siberia because obviously I don't feel like if an entity exists, it only exists in that little area. It would probably exist in other places with different names. The Striga or the Strega. This is Romania. This is a Balkan folklore, and this is a witch or a vampire-like entity that likes to prey on the living, often associated with draining its life force, which is essentially what it's doing. So it's a slow drain, like beat you up and let you die.
Mm.
It's draining your life force, but it also includes they do eye gazing or what is called eye targeted rituals. These vampire or witch like entities. So
I
eyes
don't
would be
like that.
needed for their rituals.
I'm uncomfortable.
There are other creatures and other different folklores like that, but none of them are really in that area where when I was kind of trying to get in the vicinity. So I wanted to look at something that might be close. There's like the Oni or the Strega or
Hmm.
whatever. So like there are different mythological creatures and spirits associated with eyes and like eye eating. Um the Elkins, these are spirits or creatures that are connected like with the wind and in the
Hmm.
wilderness. But their stories depict them possessing these piercing eyes and these spiritual or almost like this physical realm. But even though they're not eating the eyes, there is a huge emphasis on eyes. So maybe they needed them for something
Hmm.
else.
I
Um,
hate
Go
how
ahead.
many times you have said eating the eyes.
I mean, what are you taking the eyes for? Why are you taking the tongue? You need these things when you're performing some kind of ritual.
Some
I
kind
mean,
of
think of
ritual.
how many
Yeah,
times
no,
it's like,
that's
"Can I
true.
have the eye of frog, and I have the toad's breath and
And
the snake's legs, or the
the
spider's legs and
snake's legs,
the snake's legs?"
Carissa.
Well, snakes don't have legs anymore, okay? They used to.
That's why they took all the legs
It took all the legs, and the snakes are like, "You
for
know
their
what? I'm not giving you
rituals.
any more." I'm just kidding. Let's see here. There was one. Okay, so in some nomadic Siberian cultures, certain mythic beings are said to have eyes that can mesmerize and explicitly states that they eat eyes. There are things out there other than the Yeti and the mink that will take your body parts, drain your life force. So there are things that could have done this. We don't know.
Yeah. I think those
Uh,
things are probably more likely too because they're seen as more specifically malevolent as compared to the Yeti.
right. Part of this sounds military. Some of this
Hmm.
sounds, like the beating and all that stuff sounds like that. But there are parts of it in the beginning why they left the tent, why they weren't with the original two that died over there.
Hmm.
Like, so the fact that there's just like different breakups of this scene is like you see these two run off, but they're like leaving. Are they the only two that came out of the tent? Did the other ones leave the tent later? Was everybody trying to get out of the tent? Or was it only the
It's
first
almost
two?
like
And then
they
the other
just
two went to go
scattered.
find them.
It's almost like in a panic, everybody's scattered.
Is there
And then
proof
they
that
went
everybody
back
tried
to,
to scatter?
no, I mean, no.
So what I'm saying is maybe there's only two that try to scatter, and then they went after
It's
them.
if it's snowing, there could have been proof that of where they went, but you don't see it because they
Right.
didn't talk a lot about
The
footprints and
footprints.
stuff.
Well, yeah, because it was
But
covered in snow.
going back to when you were talking about like paranoia and such, what are the chances that it? I mean, I don't know how much I love this theory, but still, what are the chances that they somehow were exposed to some kind of plant or mushroom or something out there that has
That
hallucinogenic
grows on the
properties?
side. Yeah, that grows on because they weren't supposed
That
to be on the side of that.
maybe, yeah, and maybe those two had a higher dose. They started hallucinating sooner. They freak out. They run. Everybody's like, heck and heck is going on with these people. They find him dead. That has everybody shook. I don't know how much I love that theory given some of the injuries, but I mean,
But the injuries are any of the injuries consistent where two of the guys were punching other people? Or
I mean,
do their injuries match up with anybody's else's injuries? You know what I mean? Like their fist injuries markings match up on anybody's faces where they might have been hitting people?
not that I could read. However, just like when you were saying this, this was a autopsy done in 1959. It's very different than an autopsy done now. Obviously, technology and our understanding has advanced tremendously very quickly. So there's a possibility maybe it did, and either they didn't have the knowledge at the time to be able to match that, or these bodies were frozen
Mhm.
for a hot second. That's
Which
going to
actually
change
which is actually
things.
good when it comes to autopsies because it
It
kind of
can,
locks a timeline sometimes with
yeah,
certain things.
yeah. I work in animal medicine. I don't work in human medicine. This is not what I do, but it is something where I wonder if there's a possibility that there was some kind of mark that would have matched up with the bruised knuckles of those two men, but they weren't able to tell, or they just didn't make a note of it, because there's a lot of speculation that the medical examiner ignored things that shouldn't have been ignored, or didn't make note of things that were observed. And of course, we know that the government's official ruling was, oh, it was an avalanche.
Mm-hmm.
Which there's literally nothing consistent in these
With
injuries
an avalanche.
with an avalanche.
Yeah, the avalanche wouldn't create all these injuries or rip your eyes out or your tongue out.
No.
One thing that we did not mention, though, and before we close out, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a fun little teaser about this case that you can take your own little rabbit hole, is one of the last entries in one of the men's diaries stated, "Now we know the snowmen are real."
Yep. And I want to know what that means.
All right. This has been a good episode.
This was great. You guys got to hear me nerd out on all the medical stuff. I'm just kidding. I didn't nerd out that much.
You did a great job, especially with your pronunciations. So, first of all, anybody that can listen to us probably can't pronounce them either.
Yeah, it's true. Anybody who's listening to this, they don't know how to pronounce these names either.
Yeah, literally come at us, and then if you know how to do it, good for you. All right, but until then, until you come at us, you can follow us, and you can go to theparallaxpodcast.com and click on those little icons. You can also email us the proper way to pronounce those words and names at info@theparallaxpodcast.com. So until then, thanks for listening, mortals. I'm Karisa.
And I'm Willow. Goodbye,
Later.
mortals.